Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Kelly McLucky from Success Formula. Fantastic to have you along today to our webinar talking about electric vehicles. And I get talking about not just the technology and the vehicles themselves, but how you as a business and as a manager in a commercial fleet operation can actually manage the change and support your people as you introduce or roll out electric vehicles across the fleet. So as per the normal structure, today's webinar will be 30 minutes long. It is being recorded. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you'd like to ask any questions through the webinar, please feel free to do that at any stage. There is a little chat box or Q&A box at the bottom. You can just type your question into that field and then flick it through, and I'll be monitoring those as we go. There will be some time for questions at the end. So if you'd prefer to save it up, I will make sure that there's an opportunity to ask questions at the end as well. Along with the previous recordings and webinars that we've done, this recording will actually be published as a podcast and as a video. So if there's any of the other topics that you've missed so far this year, we've covered compliance and we've also covered distraction. You will be able to find on our website the recordings and on Spotify actually the podcasts, so you can go back and listen to those, and also a blog on there with our future upcoming topics if you'd like to join any future topics. Final piece of housekeeping: there will be a short survey at the end which just gets some feedback on what we've talked about today, but also if you have any requests or ideas for other topics that you'd like us to cover, please feel free. Just a little bit of an introduction to myself. I work at a business called Success Formula. We work predominantly in the transport and logistics sector across New Zealand and Australia. And really we are around the people risk in managing a fleet business. So that's looking at culture, that's looking at leadership and how you build your team, looking at how you manage change, and really all of those people and behavioural and cultural aspects to running a high-performing business. And that has a very natural overlap with things like safety, or like we're going to talk about today, technology and the topic of electric vehicles. So I'm just going to jump into the presentation now and bring up some slides. Don't you love it when technology works as it should? All right, so as I said, talking about introducing electric vehicles today, this is incredibly topical in New Zealand right now and across Australia as well, and for really around the rest of the world. But it's not just electric vehicles, it's probably alternate fuel vehicles too. So there's a lot of conversation about hydrogen. There has been about biofuel in the past. Really, you could sub in any of those alternate fuel vehicles into today's discussion, because this is really at a principle level how this change is going to impact your people and some of the experiences that we've had working with our customers. We all know that reducing emissions is a huge focus of the governments around the world. It's all, anyone only has to have had their eyes open in New Zealand this summer to have seen the tragic impacts of climate change, of unpredictable weather patterns, of droughts in the south, floods in the north, etc., etc. And so we know that this change is actually here. We know that there is incredible pressure being put on by governments. Actually, the targets in the emission reduction plan for New Zealand are quite ambitious. They're looking at quite a serious reduction in emissions. And actually, I've got some stats here. They're looking at a 41% reduction from 2019 levels by 2035. So that really means for us as transport professionals that we have a role to play in a change that's either going to be imposed on us or can be done with us. There are some pretty ambitious targets in that around looking at the reduction of kilometres travelled by light fleets, increasing the number of zero emission vehicles, reducing emissions from freight transport, etc., etc. Just probably a call out that what that means in practical terms from the operators that we're talking to is not just the introduction of alternate fuel vehicles or electric vehicles, but also looking at ways to reduce emissions in other ways, such as looking at the introduction of lower emission vehicles. The stats between the difference in a fleet vehicle in New Zealand right now versus a Euro 6 are quite staggering. The average age of a commercial truck in New Zealand was 17 or is 17.6 years old. So you can imagine what a difference it's going to make when those Euro 6 vehicles start to replace those older vehicles. We will see a sharp decrease in the emissions, which will be fantastic. Some of the other things that operators are looking at are load efficiency. So, how do you make sure that every load is a full load, and then you're not sending vehicles around, for example, without a backload, to make sure you're making most efficient use of that vehicle's time on the road, and also things like route optimization, so that you're traveling the shortest number of kilometers that you need to. Obviously quite tricky when a serious number of our roads have suffered in climate-related incidents, floods, cyclones, etc., bridges out, makes that quite tricky. So yeah, lots of different ways to look at reducing emissions. As I said, the change is here. This is something that is happening today all around us. There's pressure from governments, as I outlined, but there's also other pressures that businesses are starting to experience. I've got a couple of examples here of some high-profile businesses that are undergoing this change and sort of leading the way, and there are many others that I haven't included. But if I just think about the first one here on the left with Fonterra introducing electric trucks around transporting milk products, but also looking at the introduction of electric vehicles into their dairy tanker fleet. That really is about government pressure, but also we're starting to think about pressure from the farmers, the producers, pressure from the consumers. The second example here with New World or Foodstuff starting to introduce electric vehicles, not only on their transportation side about getting goods to a store, but also even last mile delivery, getting it out to your household using lower emission vehicles. But also on the right, we've got here where they're charging ahead with charging stations at their stores. So consumers who are traveling to the store with an electric vehicle and want access to charging facilities when they get there, which I thought was really interesting. The fourth example that I've got here on the screen is IKEA Australia. Now, they're really pushing ahead with this change. They have actually committed to all last mile delivery, so their delivery fleet, being electric vehicles by 2025. And we're actually working with one of their carriers. And this is a real pressure point for the carrier, not only the quick transition from fossil fuels to electric vehicles, but one of the issues they're having is there isn't enough supply. So how do they manage this transition, not just whether they want to do it and can afford to do it, but also whether they're actually able to do it. So I found that quite an interesting aspect of the change. There are lots and lots of other examples in New Zealand and internationally, waste management, courier vehicles, obviously passenger with electric buses and taxis and private car rideshare services, etc. So lots of examples where the pressure is government, the pressure is customer, the pressure is consumer, and then whether it's the right socially responsible thing to do. So there's a burning platform, the change is here. What are we going to do about it? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So firstly, I just want to cover some ideas about what you need to think about really from a project perspective. And then the second part of today's presentation, I'm going to talk about the people. What does the change mean, or the change management side of this mean to those that work in your business or your customers, etc. So as I said, starting from a project perspective, what are some of the common things that you need to think about? Well, look, the first is really assessing your options. We do know that there is a significant variability in performance and range in electric vehicles, and that they are better suited to some freight tasks. Depending on what your business actually does, it might be, for example, appropriate to replace your light utes or your staff cars with electric vehicles as a first step before looking at your line haul trucks. So really starting to assess those options, looking at the different vehicle types, looking at the different performance and range that's on the market. And then, as I said, in the example of the IKEA carriers, looking at vehicle supply. So starting to think about your asset management and when you're actually going to be replacing your fleet, and communicating with your manufacturers about what's available, when will it be available, how far in advance do you need to put your orders in, what might the lead time be for receiving those vehicles, and really just having a good ongoing conversation so that you're well understand what's actually available to you. The second thing that a lot of operators jump to is charging for electric vehicles. There's quite a lot of consideration there around the charging infrastructure that you need to have in place. So things like where will the infrastructure go? How often will it be accessible? Will you charge in that, in terms of load on your infrastructure? Will it be at night or will it be during the day? How long does it take to charge? What would the cost be and the difference between, going at times when the network has a low load versus a high load, etc. But also access to facilities. If your entire fleet's gone to electric vehicles, do you have enough charging capacity and in your area? I was talking to the National Road Carriers Association the other day, and we were talking about the Church Street where they're located over in Penrose. And it was really interesting to me that commercial street that has so many businesses on it, the providers of the network have actually informed those businesses they are already at capacity for that location. So there have been some operators that are introducing generators in order to generate enough electricity. So you can imagine if you were changing to electric fleet, what a huge consideration that actually would be, whether or not you can get access to the supply that you need. I've got here on the right-hand side just a document that in our FleetFit, NZI FleetFit organisation published a little while ago around safely transitioning to an EV fleet. The link to that is at the bottom of the screen. This is a fantastic short tool that they've put out with some really good prompts of things to think about and covers charging in particular quite well. They are actually about to publish, I believe in May, June, a fairly significant thought leadership piece with a whole bunch of input from industry, from drivers, from infrastructure organisations, etc., which goes into this in quite a bit more detail. But that, just as a suggestion, that was a really great place to start. Which leads us quite nicely into the point around insurance. Again, something that I think you really need to give some careful consideration to, whether that's talking to your broker, whether that's talking to your risk manager at your with whoever your insurance is being placed with. But talking about what does your insurance cover? What will be the implications on your premiums of changing to a different type of vehicle? What might be the implications on your excess? So just flagging it for you, it is an important conversation to enter into. Right, point number 4 is risk management. There has been quite a lot of media coverage on the risk of fires with electric vehicles and fire suppression. But look, any change in your fleet composition introduces new hazards, right? So just as any prudent operator would be doing, regularly monitoring your risk profile, having a look at what, how likely things are to happen, or if they did happen, like an electric vehicle fire, how severe they might be. That may include things like considering the location of your charging infrastructure and making sure that you've got sprinklers in place, or that there's separation between your vehicles. So yeah, just making sure that you're following those really good best practice risk management principles and updating your risk management plans to take into account this change. And then the last thing that many operators consider is the maintenance. So this is whether you're going to have access to the skilled professionals. We know that it's pretty tricky to get diesel mechanics in New Zealand anyway. So making sure that you're going to have access to the professionals that you need to be able to carry out that maintenance. What will the cost be is something else probably to consider. And then the last thing is, the sustainability aspect of this. Let's say disposal of a damaged vehicle? How would you go about that? What professionals could you consult? Where can you take care of that? But there are a lot of experts in these various fields that I've listed here. You've got experts that are introducing charging infrastructure, experts in risk, experts in insurance, etc. So I guess reaching out to your network, reaching out to your trusted advisors is really important as you go through this change, because I guarantee there'll be things that you didn't know you didn't know. So now I'd like to, no questions have come in so far, that's cool. But as said, please feel free to jump in if you do have any. Before I go on to the change management side of this, I just want to get to know those on the call a little bit more. So I've got a question here for you around, what do you think people's concerns are? Now we're moving to talking about people and the change. What do you think people are actually worried about when it comes to introducing electric vehicles? Now, I've got some suggestions in the poll, but please feel free to add any others that you think that you might have heard, whether that's in your own business or in other businesses around you. What do you think? What are you worried about, or what do you think other drivers are worried about? Cool. Right, so range and performance is the number one concern at the moment, number one answer. And look, that doesn't surprise me. Probably would be the first thing that came to my mind if I was going to jump into an electric vehicle. How far can I drive? Will this get me to where I need to go? And the second major concern that you guys have highlighted is charging. And that, yeah, totally understand. Probably slightly different concerns to those that you might have from a fleet manager, or if you put on a different hat and think of yourself as a health and safety person, or a different hat again as a CFO. So that, yeah, I guess highlights the point that one of the big parts of understanding the change is actually understanding who's been impacted by the change. So when you're thinking about how to go about this, and that might be when you're at the start of the journey to introduce an electric vehicle, or that may be when you're already, you may have already kicked off, you may have already been partway through. I think it's really good practice to sit down and make a change plan. Now you might be saying, oh, Kelly, what's that? Lots of us make a project plan, right? Which says who's going to do what, when are they going to do it by, what are the technical aspects, all of those topics that we kind of covered before. Thinking about for the introduction of this, what are we trying to achieve? A change plan is somewhat similar, but it thinks about the people aspects. So the first thing that would be included in a change plan is, what is the goal? What is the change I'm trying to implement? And examples of that in this instance might be a reduction in emissions in my fleet. Might be your goal may just simply be running a pilot and gathering learnings to what any future implementation could look like. Your goal could be a more specific around the proportion of your fleet that you'd like to change out for electric vehicles by X date. The key to it is making it measurable. Many of us have heard of the SMART goal. That's really useful because setting a fuzzy goal leaves us feeling a little unfulfilled, because no one will know if we've achieved it or not. And the point in a change plan of a measurable goal is that you can go back and you can say, hey, did I get there? If not, why not? What do I need to do differently? Is there something else that I need to change in order to reach that goal or that outcome? The second thing that we recommend that you include in the change plan is the impact assessment. When you go through when we go through with customers and talk about who do you think is impacted by this change, I don't think we give this activity enough energy. It's not just the person that's buying the vehicles. It's not just the health and safety person who's managing the risk. It's not just the driver. What about the workshop staff? What about your dispatch or schedulers who are looking at range and routes and access to charging facilities? What about your customers and the messages that you're sharing with them about the change that you're going through? What about potential recruits? You may want to be advertising to them that you are going down the route of low emissions as a way of attracting new staff. So there really is quite a broad range of people that are impacted by this change, and it's worth going through that exercise and thinking, who are they, how are they impacted, and what would be any, the positive benefits potentially to them. And that helps you create your communication plan. Really, it can be very straightforward, that communication plan, thinking about what's changing, why is it changing, and what does that mean to you? Okay, so it might be you communicate slightly differently to workshop. It might be you communicate slightly differently to your drivers or to your customers or to your management team, etc. But just thinking that through is really, really important. The number one issue that our traction customers report to us consistently year after year in transport and logistics businesses is poor communication. So this is something that we can all do better. We can all do more frequently. It doesn't have to be long briefs and doesn't have to be long emails and written stuff. Short, sharp, little updates or photos of what you're doing are really, really powerful as well. When I was doing the research for the PowerPoint presentation, there was heaps of social media pictures that businesses are putting on there to share of, hey, we're trying this out and this is what our new truck looks like and this is our charging infrastructure. What I would say is that's a great start, but remember that communication plan needs to be actually ongoing so that you keep people updated and on the journey with you. Number 4 in your change plan is training and coaching. In 2001, NZI put out a report on the introduction of safety technology. And one of the things that we learned through the research for that report is how little businesses are providing driver training. I think it was something like 57% of the drivers surveyed said they'd never received any training about the safety technology or their vehicle. So with this quite dramatic change in the vehicle and those anxieties that we identified before about charging, range, performance, hazards, etc., providing some training to your drivers is really important. That training might come from your manufacturer, might come from a specialist organisation like our one of our fellow FleetFit partners, AutoSense, do a great online training module for drivers, particularly in light fleets that are introducing electric vehicles. Something like that, just to share the information. But then you'll note I've said coaching because it's not just I've given you the information, I've trained you once. Some people learn at different speeds and will need some ongoing sharing of information, support, retraining, etc. So thinking that through is quite a good part of your change plan. And then the 5th and final part should be how are we going to monitor, measure, reinforce the change, gather feedback, capture the stories. I think the thing that I hear consistently from drivers is they love hearing from other drivers. So if there's any way you can capture the experiences or the feedback, good or bad, constructive feedback from other drivers or other people, roles within the business, they love hearing, industry loves hearing from industry. So that can be really, really powerful as a tool for introducing the change. When you're planning this transition of introducing electric vehicles, there's probably 3 kind of phases, which I've got in those blue pictures at the bottom. You've got your initial planning. I'm unfreezing. I'm thinking, okay, what needs to change? What's that going to look like? I need to get my leaders on board. I need to, tell everyone what's going on. We need to make a plan. But then you get in this transition puddle phase when it's all a bit, you're in the implementation, things are happening, people are having to learn or adapt or change their points of view potentially. In that change phase, it's really important to make sure your communication is strong. So a couple of the examples that I've got up here for how to manage that transition. First is, what about arranging demos or test drives to give people a taster? if there's volunteers, show them stuff, let them get involved, let them try it out. This is a really good way of showing people it's not scary, of informally kind of chatting about the capability and capacity of the vehicles, and sharing some of those bigger change messages I talked to before. What is the business strategy? Where we're going? What are we doing it? It might be that you decide to introduce electric vehicles by running a pilot. And one of the things we would recommend is a good way in running a pilot is to ask for volunteers. So which drivers are most interested in this? Which ones want to give it a go first? That could be a great way of providing a reward for your drivers, but it also is about engaging with people who are wanting to go through the change and giving yourself an opportunity to create some real advocates by working with those people first, those early adopters, and they'll help you should you go on to further introduce electric vehicles with communicating with drivers. They can be your champions, if you like. So that can be really cool. With your communication, there are lots of different channels of communication. That would be a whole topic for another day. But just remembering some of them will be face-to-face, and we know that that's the most powerful tool in transport, not always easy to achieve. But making sure that some of them, you might do group communication, but there's opportunities for one-on-one communication and conversations as well. A lot of people are more comfortable to share their concerns or questions one-on-one. So just making sure you create those opportunities is really great. Number 4, suggestion as you're going through this change, and even as once the change is sort of in place and you're refreezing into a new normal, it's just that importance of gathering feedback. Even when you think you know and you think you're hearing everything, we run regular driver surveys or feedback surveys with staff, and the surveys we run are generally anonymous, and every single manager that we have run the process with always finds something surprising out in the feedback that they get back. So just giving people that opportunity is really important. There's always something to learn. There's always a good conversation to be had. And then the final point that I've got here is something that gets forgotten in a lot of instances, and that's reviewing your policies and procedures. So it may be that there's some changes to your risk management stuff like we talked about before. It could be there's changes to your driver handbook, could be all sorts of policies and procedures that could be impacted. So just making sure as you're going through this transition that you're actually thinking about, what do I need to document? What do I need to capture? What do I need to make? Who do I need to tell? What do I need to make sure is actually written down? It's really, really important. So that was a whirlwind tour, conscious that we are out of time. We still haven't had any questions come through. So hopefully that's a good sign that you are feeling comfortable and happy that we've, I guess, done a bit of a flyby of what the change management for electric vehicles looks like. Look, as always, please feel free to flick us through any questions that you might have afterwards. You can find us on the website, you can find us on LinkedIn, and I've given my own personal contact details there if you'd like to flick me an email or give me a call. Really appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you so much for coming along. If you're interested in future topics, you can find those on our website, and including the recordings from past topics. And look, if you wouldn't mind just 2 minutes to fill in the survey at the end, I'd be really, really appreciative. All right. Thank you very much for coming along today, and look forward to seeing you all next month. Cheers.